When I start my stories, like I say, I'll see an event happening in my surrounding. I'll see a mother walking with her child on the street, right? It's such an ordinary picture. It's such an ordinary portrayal. But I will be like, what if she lost that child today? Both our works explore grief a lot.
I'll wake up in the middle of the night, grab my phone, open the notes app, and write exactly what's come into my head at that point. Because if I don't record it, it will be gone by
Yeah.
morning.
The grief doesn't get smaller. The grief
Yeah.
doesn't shrink. The grief doesn't go away. As we said, grief is, it's an expression of love, So if you love someone, more than you love anything else in the world, it will feel as if your world is shattering when you lose that person. If it was Stephen King or someone who said this, but for every 10,000 words you read, write 1,000. That's the only way to become a writer.
Hi, Troy.
Hi. Hi, Onyi. Hi.
How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm great.
Yeah.
We are here today on Mathrubhumi podcast. How did you?
Yeah.
To talk about, how we got here, how we became writers.
In Kerala, India, where we've just met for the first time,
For
even
the
though
first
we
time.
both live in London.
Exactly. That's ridiculous.
It's crazy.
But obviously that means that we were meant to meet.
Yeah,
Yeah, and we're having a great time. aren't we?
exactly. And I've been such a fan of yours, so I'm happy to finally meet you.
And I'm going to be stalking you at your bookshop every day. No, you will let me in. You absolutely let me in.
We're closed.
So tell me,
Yeah.
Troy, how did you take your first steps to becoming a writer?
Um, I always say it was an accident. I've always been a reader, so I was a reader, and then one day my friend was like, "Oh, hey, I have this gig for like a Wi-Fi company. Can you write a story for us?" And I was like, I don't write stuff apart from like movie reviews on my blog. And he was like, "No, no, no, you just write something." And I was like, "What kind of stuff?" He was like, "Well, just write a story and put in this Wi-Fi company's name in there." And he paid me for it, 5,000 Kenya shillings, about 50 pounds or less.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, cool. This is like really good money. So he was like, he posted it on the blog and it became very popular. And people from that kept trying to solicit work from me. Like there was a literary magazine that solicited work from me. It got published. And then when it came out, it was one of the most popular short stories, and people kept asking, like, where are your
Wow.
other short stories? And I was like, this is literally my second short story. And so from there, I've just been writing short stories. And so my journey into being a writer was I didn't set out deliberately to be a writer. Now I have a master's in creative writing from the University of East Anglia. So it's kind of more like, okay, now I'm formally a writer. But before that, I didn't consider myself like a proper writer.
So you were gently pushed in the direction that you
Gently
should
nudged.
be. Gently nudged. Someone took your foot and put it on the right path. I get that 100%. And how do you feel about it in the moment? Does it feel right to you?
It does. It does. It feels almost as if that was my purpose. It feels like that is exactly what I was meant to do.
Yeah.
So I'm really happy and I'm pleased about my journey as a writer. It's allowed me to, move to England. It's allowed me to attend festivals. Like now I'm in
Yeah.
Kerala. Like
Yeah.
I never thought I would be in Kerala because of my work. So it's been like a wonderful journey and I'm just grateful for every single moment. So how about
Fantastic.
you? How did you set out to become a writer?
Oh yeah, it was destined from birth now. Literally. I've always loved writing, and I've always wanted to be a writer. As soon as I was able to write, and even before, I told stories. And yeah, it's just been, some people call writing a labor of love, and it can be that, but for me, it's absolute joy.
Yeah.
It's an escape. It's being able to formally articulate the thoughts in your head that you may not be able to say out loud. It's
Yeah.
everything and it brings me so much happiness. So I feel like it was inevitable that I would write. Perhaps not inevitable that anyone would actually lay eyes on what I'd written, but I always knew that I was going to write in some way. I studied English at university, English and creative writing at university.
Yeah.
Did a little bit of work in like editing and journalism, and I work in tech now, but
Yeah.
writing is and will always be my first love. So
Oh,
yeah,
tech, where the money resides.
obviously
Bills
can't be
have to
starving artists forever.
bills have to be paid. Speaking of labor of love, have there been moments where you've just thought this is purely labor and there's no love? in this. Now your second book is coming out in a
Yeah.
few months. Yay, we're looking forward to that.
Yeah.
How's the process been? Have there been moments when you just felt like, why am I even doing this? Or it's just been like, yay, throughout?
I mean, I think everybody will have moments. For me personally, I think it's not necessarily the writing of the books that has felt like, why am I even doing this? It's everything else that's surrounding it. So, like I said, day job, you have a day job, and I'm preaching to the choir here because you are jack of all trades and you do everything.
Like,
And I'm similar. I have my day job, I write books, I have black pens, I mentor, I have a business on the side, and all of those things continue to tick forward while you're trying to write your book, right?
yeah, yeah,
And so at certain points, I was like, God, lift this burden for I can't do this. I can't do this. But because you love it, you
yeah.
do it,
You still
right?
do it,
So you
yeah,
do it,
and you
and
find time for it
you
in the midst of all that madness. You still find time when you're on the tube.
when you're on a
You
tube, you
start
might not eat, you
exactly
might
when
not sleep,
yeah when you're
but
on
you
the
will find
bus,
time to
when you're on
write.
the night bus, when you're leaving the club at
Yeah,
3 a.m.
when you're on the treadmill at the gym and you have your phone in front of you, yeah, you find
And
time,
that's when inspiration strikes,
right?
when you're somewhere where you think, oh my god, this can't possibly be a story. Like, I've seen things on the street
Yeah,
and I'm like, that's my story, that's
yeah.
literally the story I've been thinking about. And my writing starts from very small moments because I want to capture the tenderness and kind of what it means to be human. So when I see things on the street, that's when the question starts coming in, like, oh, what is that person's story? Do you find that's the same process for you, or do you sit down and literally think, what is the story?
I I've learned that I can't free write as much as I used to when I was young.
Yeah.
When I'm constructing something that I know will be for the masses, as it were, I need to have structure around it. However,
Yeah.
I do have flashes. For instance, I'll wake up in the middle of the night, grab my phone, open the notes app, and write exactly what's come into my head at that point. Because if I don't record it, it will be gone by
Yeah.
morning.
Yeah.
And so it's things like that I make sure that I capture. If they make it onto the page, that's a different story completely. But I find that even if it's not for a particular project, those things mean something to me and they came from my head or my heart. So
Yeah.
they deserve to be recorded some way. So I make sure I do that. Yeah. And do you find that you go through periods where you read back what you've written and you just want to throw your computer into the ocean because you hate it and then you learn to love it again? Yeah.
No.
I do that.
No, I don't know. I don't know if I'm just convinced of my own genius, which is a very dangerous thing. But at the same time, I'm a very slow writer. So
Okay.
I cannot produce my short story collection took me 6 years to produce, I'm a very methodical writer. Like, it's almost like I'm building a block, and so there's a very particular rhythm to my work that I have to get right. And once I get that right, then I'm able to say, okay, this is it. And when I was editing my short story collection for publication, I went back to stories I'd written 6 years ago. And while there are things I would have changed in terms of like the sentences or something, the integrity of the work still
Yeah.
stood. Like, I was wowed. I was like, oh, I wrote this at 24,
Yeah.
22. I wrote this at, I was just like, it felt like a whole different person, and I really appreciated that person. Like, there was so much deliberateness, even like intentionality to my work even then. And so to still see that, stay in my work even when the rhythm of my sentences have changed over the years, I still find it so fascinating.
Wow.
And it's one of those things. You said your first book took you 6 years to write, and the second one has taken you a shorter time. Do you feel like there's a difference in terms of the temperament, in terms of the storytelling? How do you find it?
I think it's more there's a quiet surety within me that
Yeah,
I know what I'm doing, and I still sometimes struggle with imposter syndrome. But it's that voice; those voices are much quieter
you had to
now
silence
with the
them.
second book. As
Yeah,
like with the first, I was just like, I can't believe this is happening,
yeah,
and I still have a lot of moments like that. But with the second book, I was like, no, this is a topic that's important to me,
hmm,
and I think the story needs to be told
yeah,
and deserves to be told, and for that reason I have far more confidence in the words that I'm putting on the page.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing about me is that, yes, I'm a perfectionist, but I've also learned that whatever you put on the page is the first draft. You have to, it's as Okweke said, you have to do the work.
Yeah,
You have to create the work,
exactly.
and then you can go back and refine the work.
Yeah.
And so I've given myself room to be able to do that.
Yeah, you must have a starting point. You know,
Exactly.
you can't allow yourself to be a perfectionist when there's nothing. There's nothing to
Exactly.
perfect. So you have
Exactly.
to at least have a draft, two drafts or something, then say,
Exactly.
okay, cool, let me clean this up. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Fantastic.
Speaking of, both our works explore grief a lot. And when I get interviewed, people are always like, why grief? Why is that like a topic you're obsessed with? And I'm like, there are other writers who write about grief. You know, you wrote about grief in Someday Maybe. What do you think draws you particularly to grief? What do you think makes you obsess? Or I don't want to say obsess, but what makes it like something you as a writer was like, you know what, my debut is gonna explore grief.
So Someday Maybe was for I wrote it for a very good friend who lost her husband via suicide.
Yeah.
So it's not based on her, but she asked me to write about grief.
Oh,
And I said no initially. I said
yeah.
no, it's a topic that I just don't feel like I'm gifted enough to articulate in the way that it deserves to be spoken about. And she was like, that's rubbish.
Yeah.
And she's like, and I've lost my husband, so you have to do what I say. And
Yeah.
she was right. So and as I got into writing about grief in Someday Maybe, I realized that the way that I wanted to write about it was a way that I think, because of the state of our society and how everything is very capitalistic, you can only take a certain number of days off to mourn, and then you
Yeah.
must be back at work, you must move on, you must be
Yeah.
better. And
Yeah.
I decided to write a story that reflects the actual reality, which is that, yeah, we may have to be forced to do those things, but why?
Right.
And my main character, Eve, she just decides, I'm not going to do that. I'm
Yeah.
broken and I'm going to act broken
Yeah.
until a day comes where I'm less broken.
Yeah.
And that was special to me. So a lot of people resonated with that, and other people were like, oh no, I don't, it's too much, it's
Yeah.
too sad.
Yeah.
And I understand that. I don't think anything exists that is too sad.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's all relative. So
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, especially with grief, you know, we all grieve very differently.
exactly.
I happen to come from an extended family where over the years we've lost so many people. And with every person you lose, you see how it's a different kind of grieving. You know, the space they live is very different. When my great grandmother died, she was like the glue that held the family together. And so you can kind of see how with every person, and you know, my grandmother had 13 children and now there are only three left, you know. And so all these have happened while I'm growing up.
Yeah,
And so for me it's just like, what else is there to talk about when grief is everywhere? You know,
exactly.
we all experience it. It's as inevitable as, you know, the passage of time.
Yeah.
So how do you just ignore it, or how
Ignore
do
it.
you not go into your work and say, you know what? And I like grief, you know, I like exploring grief because there's a certain kind of nakedness that it leaves you with.
Yeah.
It's just like, it's almost like walking around town without
Yeah.
underwear. You're the only person who knows you don't have underwear, but you always
Yeah.
feel like other people
Yeah.
can tell that. And so for me, that's kind of how, and I like that people come into my work and they encounter that kind of grief
Yeah.
and they can connect with it and they can relate with it. And I'm sure that's been the
Yeah.
same
And
thing with Someday Maybe, you know.
it's and grief, it's multifaceted, and
Yeah.
grief reveals you, and it's all like I said, at its core, it's an expression of love,
Yeah.
right? You don't care, you don't grieve for somebody that you don't care about. You grieve for people and mourn people that are close to you, that are near to you, that mean something, have touched you in some way.
Yeah.
And I just think that it's so interesting that we are still, as a society, so in certain ways repulsed by grief or
Exactly.
terrified by grief.
Yeah.
We don't lean into it, and
Yeah.
for me it's important to lean into it. So for you, Troy, is the process of writing about grief and loss, is it cathartic? Do you have to put it on the page?
I don't have to. I don't feel like there is an obligation. But at the same time, when I start my stories, like I say, I'll see an event happening in my surrounding. I'll see I'll see a mother walking with her child on the street, right? It's such an ordinary picture, it's such an ordinary portrayal, but I will be like, what if she lost that child today? How will she explore that? Or what if she disappeared from this child's life, you know? And that's where the story comes in, and that's where my imagination comes in. So it's a lot of building on memory of like, oh, this is a feeling that I've
Yeah.
sat with, this is a feeling that I've wanted to explore for the longest time in my life. And so this image, this memory, this imagination allows me to reconcile this memory.
Yeah.
Do you find it's the same process for you, or is it a very different
Yeah,
approach?
I feel like with grief, because like you, I've lost people in my life, and I at the time may not have known what to say.
Yeah,
Being able to write about it, maybe after the fact, is a form of release
yeah,
for me.
yeah,
And it's important that I do that. It may be not be, it may not be a novel.
yeah,
It may be in a journal. It
exactly.
may be in something that nobody else will see but me. But I need to get it out, and I
Yeah,
need to get it on the page, especially if I don't have the words to speak about it at the time.
yeah.
And do you feel like grief is something that you have to move past, or that you have to work around or get over, as it were?
No, I don't
Yeah,
think anyone ever gets over grief.
same.
There's this
Yeah.
graphic I saw on Instagram one day, and it, you know, it's one of those images you see where it's like we think grief is like, you know, this ball in a jar.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah, and then you know,
Yeah.
we think, oh my God, the ball is gonna get smaller and
Hmm.
smaller, but actually the jar gets bigger and
Yeah.
bigger. And so our capacity to deal with grief is what expands. Our
Yeah.
capacity, the grief doesn't get smaller, the grief
Yeah.
doesn't shrink, the grief doesn't go away. You
Hmm.
know, as we said, grief is, you know, it's an expression of love. You know,
Expression
so
of love.
if you
Yeah.
love someone, you know, more than you love anything else in the world, it will feel as if your world is shattering when you lose that person. And so the process of moving on is you growing and becoming bigger. And you know, that becomes a way of almost like reverse magnifying the grief. So the grief is almost, it stays the same size, but your capacity to deal with it becomes bigger. And that's how we as human beings deal with grief. You know, there's no moving past it. You know,
Yeah.
my aunt still comes to me in a song. You know, I listen to a song and remember, you know, when I was 7 and we'd listen to that song with her, and she'd be saying, "Oh, you know,
Yeah.
you're the one who knows how to dance." And it will be like a random song I'll be listening to at like 3 a.m. somewhere, and the grief will just come back.
Yeah.
But on an ordinary day, I don't go around carrying the weight of that memory,
Yeah.
you know. But as soon as a song or a TV show or a plate or food that she loves or something that my great grandmother loved, you know, comes to me, then that grief comes on.
Yeah. So, Troy, we've spoken about grief. We've spoken about what writing means to us. If you could give one piece of advice to aspiring writers, what would it be?
Read.
It's a big one.
Just read. I mean, that's the only way you can write anything meaningful. You know, for every 10,000 words you read, I don't know if it was Stephen King or someone who said this, but for every 10,000 words you read, write 1,000. That's the only way to become a writer.
Amen.
What
I
about you?
definitely
You're the one who's published all these books.
all one.
What advice would you give 13-year-old Onyi or 17-year-old Onyi who is trying to navigate the world through writing?
Don't overthink it. Just write and listen to the ones that love you. That's what I would tell her. But
That's
yeah,
such amazing advice. I
yeah,
feel like overthinking
yeah,
kills most of our talents. And
absolutely,
so I feel like that's a good place to close the podcast. Don't
absolutely.
overthink it.
Don't overthink it.
Yeah.
Before we close out, how did you get to where you are?
How did I get this far? I got this far by reading, and
Mm-hmm.
I think everyone needs to read just so they can get to however far they want to be. Reading unlocks so many worlds that, you know, we didn't even think were possible.
Mm.
I first encountered Kerala through reading, and it's only years later that I'm coming here.
Mm-hmm.
So I would tell anyone who is trying to become a writer to just read.
Mm-hmm.
Onyi, how did you get this far?
By learning to stop as much as I can overthinking things,
Mm-hmm.
by just putting the words on the page, and by listening to the people that know and love me best.
Okay.
Thank you, guys. Been a pleasure.